I call the session to order. And can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Changes to the agenda?
Yes, I have one change to the consent agenda. I'd like to add the resignation of Andrew Lecuyer, who's, I believe, an art teacher. Is that music, sorry.
Okay, so we're adding that to the consent agenda, resignation.
And
I'd like to make a motion to, do I do this now? Yes, okay. To waive the fee that's detailed in the CBA regarding the early resignation for the contract
Okay.
year.
Okay, so we have two motions.
So both in
Or
the
is-
consent agenda with the same person,
Sorry,
the resignation
Right.
and the waiver of the waiving of the fee.
right. So we're just rolling that into one motion.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So John, you made the motion, and Alicia, are you seconding that?
Yes,
Okay.
that sounds good.
Okay. All right. So roll call vote. John,
aye.
thank you. Alicia,
Yes.
thank you. Patty,
Yes.
thank you. Lisa,
Yes.
thank you. Christine,
Yes.
thank you. John, oh, I did John. Charlie,
Aye.
thank you. I say aye. And that change has been made. Thank you. All right, so let's start then with our public comments.
Yeah, so I gotta just go to our website real quick to get the policy because I appear to have accidentally dropped it off. But while I am doing that, anybody who would like to make a public comment, it's free to do so, provided they meet the criteria listed in our policy. If you would like to make a public comment and you are remote, you may do so by using the hand raise feature. It should be at the bottom of your screen. We will be able to acknowledge you from there. Then please use your first name, your last name, and your town of residence. And again, just make sure you have a chance to read the policy before you make a comment.
All right, thanks for saying all that, Nick.
All right, we don't appear to have anybody at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you. All right, on to then the superintendent's report.
Thank you. So today was actually kind of exciting. We had the second meeting of this year's Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee. And we are currently working on three things. One, we have a group that is working on the kind of framework for how we view literacy. And when I say literacy, I mean reading, writing, speaking, at least from K through 8. And then we'll talk about high school later on, but there is some significant building that needs to take place in the area of literacy, and make sure that it's consistent across the board from in our elementary schools and then middle school. And so that work has just started. You have another group who's working on the research on social emotional learning and curriculums. That's part of our MTSSB implementation plan, is to make sure that we have a K through 12 or PK through 12 curriculum. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's all going to be the same, but at least it has a flow to it. Whatever the materials we're using and whatever the approach we're using is spelled out and systematic all the way through. And then another group that is developing the policy that will come to the school board on, and I say policy like little p policy, come to the school board on how the CIA team will operate, how they'll make decisions, how they'll go forward, what are the processes that they'll have. Some of them are already written out in school board, policy, big P policy. So that will just be included in that process and everything. So those three things are happening, and we started on that today. So that's exciting. The bulk of the report, as it has been for the last year and a half to 2 years almost, is just keeping people updated on school data, on COVID-related, illness-related matters. Last week, we did have a committee meet, review a lot of this data. Some of it has been updated for this meeting here, and talked about the trends, talk about what the literature is out on COVID, the Delta variant and so forth, and where we're heading, and to make the best decision possible for the health of our students, and health being defined as not only their physical health, but also their mental health and well-being as well. We have had many conversations about getting things into a more normalized setting was going to be better for the mental health of our learners. And so though we are not at what we would consider normal, we have done our best so far to balance everything that we have been able to. And we'll take a look to see if we've balanced well or if we need to make some adjustments. At the end, I'll have some recommendations about going forward, but you may see the data in other ways and make some other decisions as well. So the first few slides we're going to go through fairly quickly. They're ones that we look at. These are straight from the COVID-19 NewHampshire.gov dashboard. If you go and Google that, or if you go to NHDPIHS, you can get to this information. Most of the information is from the 25th, even if it's been retrieved today. There was an issue with their website giving accurate information. Some of the information is from today. Certainly our information is as recent as possible. That is internal to us. So if we look at the second one there, you see that this is kind of the progression from June of 2021 this year, as we started before, when the team met early on in June, and they had kind of made a statement about, well, let's see if we have like 3 feet of social distancing, and we'll keep it there, but we'll meet again in August. And if things have stayed the same or gotten better, maybe we'll remove that. Things, as you can see, going right to the middle section there, went from yellow to red in that time frame, which is all about community transmission. And we decided to stay the 3 feet, actually added the element of recommended, which meant that if you don't have 3 feet, then you have to wear a mask. So that is our mandatory masking piece right there, which is very well observed at the elementary school, specifically in lines, in the cafeteria. There's a lot of spacing. They've done a very nice job in both schools, and it's not easy to make sure an elementary school functions in that capacity, but our 2 schools have done very well. Here, it's a little bit more difficult to do so, but people are moving around very quickly. They're not, next to each other for longer periods of time, but we've had a lot of success with people eating outside, with being spaced, and if they're asked to be spaced, then they do so. And certainly we have some classes and some content areas where they are masked. We look at this next one, just from August and October. You can see the increase in cases, new cases per 100K. That's just giving you the language that shows, or the data that shows what those colors meant, yellows and reds, and these would both be considered red. We've increased 5-fold over that time with the number of cases. This next one is a slide that I've shown multiple times, just always looking at the 0 to 9 and 10 to 19 ranges, just to see what the hospitalization rates are, level of illness. Have there been any deaths in the state of New Hampshire in those categories? And those have remained relatively unchanged. The group that has had the least number of infections has been that 0 to 9 range. There has been some hospitalization, but not an incredible amount, relatively speaking, like 1%. And then there have not been any deaths in that area. Either of those ranges 0 to 9 and 10 to 19, which is the age bracket that we are working with in our school district. This next one is just to give you some updated information. If you go to the NHDPS, you can get this as well. Jaffrey went up about 0.5 point for the number of individuals, percentage of individuals vaccinated. Ringe stayed the same as last time, 2 weeks ago. Ringe had in the last 14 days, 34 active cases, Jaffrey 18. The ones in parentheses, as of the 25th, I believe it is, were the number of active cases at that point in time. So 7 and 12, so fewer than the 18. So 18 and 34 look back a whole 2 weeks. And those ones in parentheses are the current active ones. We look at district data. This is an interesting graph. You can see from the beginning of the school year, or at least the end of September, where we started to have our cases, our first case. You can see that the majority of our people who are absent were in quarantine. That is the case that you're going to see all the way through this presentation. That is a concern that was shared with us from community members, that if there was anything that we could do about quarantine times, that would be fantastic, because there are some individuals who are missing a lot of schooling due to quarantine. Now we've decreased our quarantining this year to only what the DPHS has recommended or stated should happen, which is within families. I will say that it makes sense to quarantine when you're dealing with families, because the information that we have in the background of most of our cases is that once a family member has COVID, it tends to spread. So a lot of our cases that I'm reporting, if you see someone has been not in school, like tonight, I reported someone wasn't in during the 19th, or if someone like a week or two or whatever, it is likely they've been on quarantine already, haven't been in the buildings, and they are then getting positive due to the fact that their family members are. So a lot of that is what's happening. So we're reporting a lot of those numbers. You can go to you can see with this though, however, that over time, we have seen a little bit of a stabilization and some decrease in the number of absences due to illness or even quarantining. I sent an email out, you have received it, whether you've been able to see it or not, because we've been in meetings. We did have 5 cases reported today, 4 at Jaffrey Grade School, 1 at Conant High School. They don't appear to necessarily be related at the elementary school, certainly not at the high school. But we are continuing to watch that as we have. This next one right here is an interesting graph, just to show again the percentage over time of that. Red is COVID, yellow is quarantining, and blue is all other sicknesses. And you can see that as COVID went up early on and sicknesses went up, they all went up together. And so that spike just keeps on happening. So when something is going around, everything's going around, basically. And then the majority of our absenteeism, however, still has been around quarantining. So it's out of precaution. Some of that's good in that in quarantine, we're going to define it as, yes, they are with their family during a time when someone is, positively is tested positive for COVID, but it is also waiting for testing results. And that unfortunately has not been the best thing this first quarter. A lot of people have wasted a lot of time waiting for test results. So we did make that change earlier, that they could go and get a kit and do the test results, and we would, if they follow certain parameters, we would accept those. I have been told that the hospitals are gearing up to be faster with testing. That was from one of our members on the committee who works at the hospital. I don't know what that actually means from a standpoint of, is it twice as fast? Is it, it certainly isn't as quick as what they were turning around last year when they were really moving the testing. So we go to the next slide. the one that says COVID-19 cases. This is just an accumulation. And you can see, so these are not like new cases and, oh, like, you know, the last Friday, look, we had 40 new cases or whatever. No, that's just an accumulation of the entire thing, but you can see the accumulation of absences due to illness, due to COVID, over that period of time, you know, everything at different, so from CHS, sorry, these are all COVID, sorry, positive cases, CHS, JRMS, RMS, and JGS. And you can see that JRMS, the middle school, hit a specific period of time around that October 1st, a little bit before and a little after timeframe, where they had quite a few cases. We had very few cases at RMS until they had that cluster. CHS continues to be the group that really has the least, that along with JGS, but I think as of today, CHS, the high school, is the one with the fewest cases, which is a little bit different than what we would have anticipated. And is a little bit different than the data would suggest, that the older they get, that, you know, perhaps the easier the infection. Going to the next one right there, you can see just a different way of looking at the data. This one shows JGS having the fewest cases, CHS having the second fewest cases. RMS, actually, I think there's another graph. Yeah, the next graph shows RMS had that cluster, and now the last 3 days they haven't had any, and today, 4 days if you include today, haven't had any positive cases over at that place reported, along with the middle school, interestingly enough. So the middle school, the places where they've had more, you know, at kind of the middle school early on, and then RMS during that period of time where they had that cluster. I guess both in some cases had a cluster. We'll talk about that later on. But they both are the ones that have not reported any for the last several days. As you can see, actually, that before that, however, CHS had gone almost 2 weeks without something. So we go to the next slide. This shows another kind of picture of where things happened. The red line again is RMS. The yellow line is JRMS. What I put there is that the state reported that there was a cluster from a bus. That bus did account for about 6 cases. Not all of them were middle school, but the majority of them were. We did an investigation to find out what was going on, because we haven't had really a lot of bus transmission, which is interesting. We are fully masked on all our buses as well. And that bus in particular, after looking at several snapshots of the bus and so forth, they, in the morning time in particular, but in the afternoons even less so, people were very spread out. They all had their masks on, and it was one of the buses that had the fewest number of kids. So it could have, I suppose, happened on a bus. You know, there were evidence that windows would have been opened as well at that point in time. But they were very much separated from one another. And so it's possible that buses go to specific locations and maybe specific, maybe they're with each other outside of school, maybe they're in the different housing together. It's tough to say, but regardless, we did have several during that time frame in the same bus, bus 48, I believe it was. And then the same thing, we had 4 or 5 cases over at RMS during that situation, the cluster that we had. This is just a total. This is as of today, not accurate, but this was as of Friday, this was accurate. Percentages are still fairly close. Next slide, just another way of showing sickness, COVID, and quarantine over time. Again, looking at JGS, you can see all of the illness being in that, well, until, you know, recently, but really with the exception of a couple spikes, they have been largely absent due to quarantine. And the same thing with the high school as well. If we flip to the next slide, this gives more information about the October 1st cluster of the bus and the October 12th cluster at RMS. We have a comparison to a local school district. I have been trying to get information from other local school districts as well. It's not been easy. Some make their information public, some don't. This is an example of a school district where they're in the general area. They're similar size. They have 200 to 300 more students than we have, probably maybe 300 more students. They're universally masked. We're in that recommended. So we do have several people wearing masks, but not, the majority aren't, at least in this building. And, they had about 3 times the number of cases as we currently do, or as of today anyway. And that's not to put down what another district does, because I don't think that they have a whole lot of control over that. They're doing what they can. They chose the mitigation measures that they did. And a lot of stuff happens outside of school. A lot of anything that we see, again, if you have big families, once it hits a family, it goes through the family. So whether there's been transmission at the school over there, I do not know. But the point being is that, we're doing, the numbers have been higher in the area. I think we saw that through the community transmission. Delta has been fairly contagious. And there have been a lot of numbers within schools this year, masked or unmasked. Now, when we think about what we want to do, we can continue to do the same thing. We can loosen up what we're doing. We can increase mitigation efforts. Again, keeping our learners in school and keeping our learners and staff healthy mentally, as well as COVID and other illnesses. We have to do the normal things like keeping up the cleaning. And John has been religious about making sure that when there is any sort of case that they're doing more disinfecting. I think the school board did a great thing last year when it invested in $80,000+ worth. Well, what we spent was $80,000, worth a lot more. John did a great job negotiating that contract with the company that came in to put the I-waves in. So we have, even right now, this room is actively has air purification going on where the I-waves are ionizing the water molecules in the air. And so not getting rid of 100% of COVID, but it is doing a lot. And I think that, that does a lot for our in-person transmission or lack thereof. It's not going to take care of everything. So we talked about risk tolerance early on. I made a little graphic here, changed up the graphic a little bit and said, yeah, we've had spread. We've had some in the building, but in general, just the COVID in general has been spreading. I think we have that information through the community. Has it been spreading at a high level? I think that it has been spreading at a relatively high level in comparison to what we had last year, maybe faster. Certainly a year ago, it wasn't spread as far. For our school, if we were to compare it with another school, we're following that kind of a middle zone. It's spreading a lot more than what we did last year. We didn't have any spread almost last year. Maybe, starting this month, I think we had our first case or second case. And, but the severity is another thing to look at. We don't have data saying that this has been that severe. And I don't mean severe, like people have been out, that's the severity. I mean, if you think about it, is the fact that they're not in school if they're out. But again, we're following the guidelines that have been provided to us on that. But we have not had reports of the illness being severe. The state has not had deaths in that area. They've had very few hospitalizations. So the data is not telling us the numbers. I'm not talking in science again, because we can look at science in different ways and science changes. The math, the statistics of it don't show it being significantly severe, even if the spread is higher. So we could even move that yellow bubble along and say that, all right, 40 is a lot, 45, 46 is a lot. I think it's a lot across the district, but in comparison to other places, it might not be a lot. But even if we put it on the higher, it's not changing the severity level. So that's something to think about. We've had other illnesses this year that have been more severe. Other schools have been in the paper for illnesses other than COVID that have been more severe. I think tuberculosis was over in one of our, it was Concord or Manchester, one of those earlier this past month. You know, those are big deals. And so that's what I mean by level of severity. I think another thing that we talked a lot about, and I don't know if the committee did so much, but I know that in my correspondence back and forth with parents, because we do have parents who do not feel that we have done enough. They do not believe, some have stated, you are not taking this pandemic seriously. Others have said that you're doing too much. We don't appreciate having the masking that is even going on. Others are in the middle. I would say the majority of the communications are in that kind of middle zone. I think we received another one today that was, I don't like the masking, but I think, you know, things are being managed appropriately. Now, these communications come from different pockets. What we do find is that the people who have the greatest concern relative to, at least with the correspondence coming our way, is at the elementary level, because their learners, some have cited this, don't have the opportunity to have a vaccine. As of this past Friday, that has changed. So the FDA has approved an emergency approval for, I think at least Pfizer, I'm not sure about the other ones, vaccine. And we've been told that there have been, I think WMUR said 15,000 doses for this age group, 5 to 11, have been ordered. I think more has to come. Certainly, that percentage of those numbers of dosages would probably be like 30% or so of what really needs to take place. But there, as early as this week, I can't speak for certain about this specific area, but as early as this week in the state of New Hampshire, is stated that this would be available. So I've included this chart that I found on one of the sites that was being reported. I think it was maybe a Portsmouth paper or something. Jaffrey has a site that is, I believe that is Rite Aid. Keene has several sites. And so those are in our area. Ringe has a couple of sites as well. I don't have the key as to what those sites are. I think I cut those off. And then Peterborough also has a couple of sites. So down the road at Rite Aid, they're supposed to be getting this, and these are in Jaffrey. And there's a couple of spaces in Ringe as well, and then of course Keene and Peterborough. So that would add, if a parent chooses to do that with their 5 to 11-year-old, that would add another layer of protection. The other thing that we would need to think about, because spring sports and fall sports are largely played outside, winter sports. And so Heather went to the NHIAA. They are not implementing a strict masking policy this year. A majority of the athletic directors said they are advocating to have everyone mask in their gyms, except for the athletes who are on the court. So that's a stark change from last year, where people were on the court masked and playing, but they're advocating for that not to take place. And then that visiting teams would have to adhere to whatever the home team, if we went over to Messinic and they had some sort of practice over there, we would have to do whatever their practice is. So my recommendation is along the lines of what the committee had recommended. In light of the fact that we continue on with our cleaning. We have our iWave air purification in all our schools, which seems to be doing its job as comparison to maybe some other local schools and schools around the state who have had to either close down or go remote or what have you. There's been certainly more than one. Most of those places have been masked fully. I do think that matters that we have those air purification systems in here. The cleaning, I think that John and his crews are doing better and better all the time, and we're getting closer to full capacity in that area as well. We have the mitigation strategies matrix. Some people think it's loose, other people don't like the fact that masks are talked about. And then there's everything in between. The one statement was made that they felt that the matrix was made just as a way to appease people and that it was never going to be for the purpose of protecting anyone. That was not certainly the committee's thought process on that. The committee's thought process, as was reported to me, is that this is an illness. We treat it as an illness. We want to make sure that we're not going to go above any sort of threshold where we have a lot. It's happening significantly within a school setting. We want to make sure that we have our teachers here. We want to make sure we have our kids here, and we'll follow the data as to the severity of it. Obviously, if you're talking about something much more severe, even if it wasn't transferring, if you had something that was much more than what the symptoms are as of right now, we're seeing a lot of cold symptoms. If they were more significant than that, as were being reported last year, and you had far fewer cases, you think in a different direction, you think in a different way. Because even with those simple cases, the probability would be more severity, and we don't want that. After school athletics or drama events indoors, follow others' rules when visiting. I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of choice about that. The idea of masking fans and seated athletes in our gymnasiums. And then the plan to televise, we're going to be televising. We do have cameras in there. We do need to find someone to make sure that's all set up on a regular basis, because Nick can't be at everything, but we do have the supply, the technology to be able to do so. And so those who are not comfortable coming in can certainly be at home. And that means if they're not comfortable because masks would be worn, according to this recommendation, then they can watch from home. Or if the board chooses to go the opposite direction, same rationale. Reasoning for masking fans. It's a group of people you really don't control very easily. There's seating, but there's getting up, there's moving around. At games, there's usually a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, a lot of cheering. That's not your usual conversation area. We're having a conversation, or I'm just talking anyway, and you're listening, but not a lot is coming out of my speech. That's very different when you're next to people and they're doing that sort of thing. So to limit that type of spread of whatever illness in there, and we're going to have students who are in the stands as well, making sure that they are don't have that exposure in that 1.5 hour area where they're in close contact with a wide variety of people. That's the reason for the masking there. It makes sense. We don't have really another scenario where you're with a group of people that long without, like maybe in an elementary school classroom, but they control their seating and their distancing, and elementary learners are not screaming in a classroom, cheering for their teacher to do a math problem. I don't know, something like that. So those are the recommendations. We can ask questions or anything. I know that we have kind of the decision process later on in the agenda, just to give you some time to think about that.
Well, here's just a quick question
Mhm.
for the sporting events. It says masking of fans and seated athletes. Where do the coaches fall into that? Will they be, just out of curiosity, will they be masked because they're on the court or
Well,
not? I mean,
really, the
yes,
coach shouldn't be on the court. We have a bit of an issue with our basketball court because we have such a small sideline. It would be my recommendation that they would have masks on. You know, I think that there was some conversation about that. Am I correct, Nick, on that? That area?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of conversation about, you know, the idea of allowing more people in, you know, do they mask, do they not mask? Do you put a cap on the number of people? Do you have certain types of seating arrangements? Ultimately, it was decided, and a lot of this recommendation started with Heather having this conversation with all the other Division III athletic directors. So there's this concept around like trying to have at least most districts kind of buying into the same thing or something similar, so that there's a little bit of a kind of similarity in terms of going around to different things. I know that Heather said that she'd obviously keep myself, Ruben, and obviously the board in the loop as to if things change in those conversations, whether with the NHIAA or with the athletic directors. But it ultimately was decided, or at least in the conversation that she was a part of, that, you know, allowing the athletes on the court to be the ones that don't have to mask, just due to, we've talked about some of the reasons on recommendations before, but things like, you know, when you're going down the court, having it fall off or fall down, having to pick it back up, you know, having germs on the mask, then putting it on the ball, things like, you know, just being able to breathe, having it not ride up and kind of cut off the a little bit of your side view. So there were a bunch of different reasons that were brought up at that athletic director meeting, and then also at the committee.
So presumably cheer would not be wearing masks either, because technically that's an indoor sport. They would be active in their actions, but off to the side of the court.
Well, I think that, and we could come back this next time with a more solidified plan. I would see them being off the court, the very close proximity, that maybe you would have your masks on, but if they were doing their event on halftime, that would be a time when they're performing.
Okay.
And that would be a time when they wouldn't have it. That would be how I'd interpret it.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Just two notes that came up as I'm watching your thing. The graphs that you gave, the statistics you gave, talk about percentages in kind of broad ways. And there aren't really a breakdown of numbers for the quarantine. It seems the quarantine is a sticking point right now. So I see percentages, but not physical numbers per school. But I do think it's interesting to note as a note that the school that you mentioned, Conant, that with the high school having the fewest seemingly cases, and I'm assuming that means the fewest quarantine as well, which I couldn't tell in the stats.
Well, percentage wise, it would look very similar.
Okay.
You know, our nurses do a great job. I mean, they're treating everything as though it is COVID, unless they have knowledge that someone has allergies or knowledge of something else, or if someone's had COVID already, they're not going to say, oh, you got COVID again next week, you know, after you're coming back. So they have data on specific people, so they wouldn't put other people that they don't have that. They're going to treat it like COVID, and so so they're making the same call for each one, and so they're treating it very similarly across the way, which, you know, not all families, I think they understand. I think it's very tough. This is not, we don't have people who have a load of, you know, paid leave to be able to leave work and do all this. We're not in that zone anymore, like we were at one other time when a lot of people were working from home. So it's been tough.
Um,
But numbers, we do have those numbers. Do you have any right offhand, Nick? I know we have it. I think we might have those up on the website.
No, they wouldn't be front facing on the website. You just
Okay.
get the pure percentage of
Okay.
the entire number.
And that's
It's
fine.
something I could certainly share with the board.
Yeah.
I can try to pull it up.
Well, I have what I did last time, and I talked about numbers, so I can tell you what our averages are real fast. That wouldn't be too hard to pull up real fast.
Yeah, I mean, speaking just to the percentage point, part of the reason why percentages were used, a lot of these graphs that were shown were just graphs that were shown at the ad hoc committee meeting, just with, the extra week's worth of data. Percentages were used because one of the first charts that was shown showed last year's data that we had compared to this year's data. And because we had, four almost 500 students less in person last year than we do currently, if you did number to number, it obviously didn't look the same. So it was brought to percentage. And then just because it was brought to this meeting and we didn't have that one chart, it wasn't converted into a number instead of a percentage. So again, we do track all of those numbers daily, so that it's something that we could provide to the board in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so like for instance, on Friday, the 15th of October, we had 4 individuals at the high school that were absent. No, that was non-COVID, sorry. Learners in, oh yeah, we had 6 learners who were in quarantine. And the other categories were 2 positives at the time and 4 absence that were non-COVID related. So you saw the majority of those were quarantined. The other schools had 9, RMS had 4. That was a day that RMS had 6 positive cases. And so their number to the quarantine was lower than their positive cases. Now, probably the day or two beforehand, it may have been the opposite way because some of those quarantine cases turned into positive cases, but yeah. So, not total across the district, about, 70 to 90 people absent. And then out of that, you're talking about 40% of those probably due to quarantine.
I do think it worth noting that Conan, that the high school will have the most people vaccinated and has visibly fewer positive cases. I want to put that note in there. The other just quick bizarre note, being a media specialist, the plan to televise the home games. I know that at most, especially the basketball games, we pipe in music, and that's perfectly acceptable copyright wise for doing that, but televising it and posting it and YouTubing it would not be. And that would just be something to not walk into blindly.
Yeah, so worst case on that is that if there is music that is deemed unacceptable by YouTube standards, they would just cut the audio from the video. Last year, we just had a laptop and a camera up on the stage. So we were picking up some level of noise, but it wasn't anything that you necessarily really followed along with in a meaningful way. There were a couple videos that we had because they were started as, the teams were warming up, and they were playing like warm-up music. And in those cases, the music was it was flagged as something that had a copyright issue. It just cut the audio in that section. And there are things like that, but because we have an education account, there's like a little bit more leeway, and obviously YouTube's building out their tools to be able to catch that stuff and just kind of say, hey, like, you can't do that, and it'll flag it and move on. So
Are there any theatrical events happening?
I don't know when they're scheduled, but I believe that drama does plan on having some events.
So would this fall into that as well? And could that be televised as well? Or is that another?
And speaking with the club advisors last year, they said that, so last year we were able to televise because one was a student written play and the other one was a fair use play. There could be some issues with televising certain plays depending on the rights that we have as a school district. In some cases, because it's an educational thing, they might allow it. Other cases, we might have to pay an additional fee if we are interested in doing it, and other ones we just straight up can't. So I know that that's at least kind of a thought of the drama productions and things like that. I know that last year when we did, we obviously didn't have like any choir performances or anything like that, but in the videos that we made and we posted online, there was extra care taken to ensure that whatever music they were performing was fair use, so that it wasn't going to get taken down or have the audio stripped. So.
And are we doing any choral things right now? Choral and band presentations, performances?
I don't know what our next one is scheduled. So I don't have that information right now.
Holidays are coming.
Were you going to talk at all about seating or later?
Well, just seating in general, I mean, I still have more questions to ask, but the idea was that they would allow seating to occur and not necessarily restrict the seating.
In other words, no social distancing?
Mhm.
So that even makes the mask mandate a rationale for masks
Yes.
even stronger because you're not going to do social distancing.
Mhm.
So it's whatever maxes out as far as the gym is concerned,
Mhm.
or the venue is concerned. Right?
Mhm.
So if we do it as we do a drama on the top floor, we just put all the chairs in there.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and just as a point of clarification, because Carrie Swift is on the meeting and she just messaged me. She said that December there would be a chorus and band at the high school level. So
For the public?
we'd obviously have more details after, but there at least will be performances, and I can meet with Carrie to get the details on those for you guys.
Okay, so we're on to the consent agenda now.
Yep.
So I need a motion from someone for the consent agenda as we amended it earlier.
I'd like to make a motion, we approve the consent agenda as amended.
Thank you, Charlie.
Oh, second, Lisa?
Thank you, Lisa. All right, roll call vote. John?
Yes?
Thank you. Alicia?
Yes.
Thank you. Patty?
Yes.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yes?
Thank you, Christine.
Yes.
Thank you, Charlie.
Aye.
Thank you. I say aye, and the consent agenda passes 700. Sorry, I forgot. It's about acting now on the recommendation that was made regarding the reopening framework. It is to remain with the current approach. And for activities, follow the guidelines of the school that you're visiting, mask fans and athletes not actively playing, and to televise activities for the games and events. So is there motion?
I have a question. What is it that we're specifically adding to the reopening framework? And where is it going?
So there would be no act, if you were to go with the remain things the same, there would be no action
Correct.
on that portion of it. The only thing would be
I don't
maybe,
see anything in there that changes the existing framework.
Yeah, so if you guys were to vote for this as recommended, the only thing that would be added to the framework would be the additional after-school athletics section. So what we would do is we would create a section in our athletic spot. It would say winter activities, and then we would add in language that would say, you know, masking of fans, seated athletes, those actively participating would not have to be masked. We would follow other places rules when visiting, give examples saying, you know, visiting games, but also things like swim team, ice hockey, places where we don't have a home facility to play at, so we go elsewhere. So we would essentially just be adopting these 3 bullet points and creating you know, that language in a section, you know, 3-4 sentences probably.
Do you really want to include the last one?
I mean, last year, all we did was we had a line in there that said we will do like something like we will do the best we can to televise events or something of that nature. We don't have to add it in there. It's ultimately just a goal. We have the equipment would be similar to run as to last year. The one component that you'd be adding in this year that you didn't have last year is now, instead of popping a webcam up on the stage, you have a wall-mounted camera that is similar to the movable camera right here. So you would add in one of these controllers. You would have somebody push play, and then we're working on seeing if we can provide or find a student that would be willing to operate that camera, which would be just the movement, you know, kind of going from one side to the other rather than just having a fixed perspective in the back. So that would be the one additional piece. So I'm working with Heather right now to kind of see if they can find any student volunteers that would be willing to do that activity.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that we modify the reopening framework to include the fall athletic and drama events, indoor events.
winter, right?
Is it winter?
Yeah.
Fall and winter. To follow the other locations rules when visiting, masking of fans and seated athletics, and that we plan to televise the home games and events.
Thank
And
you,
just
Charlie.
one point just to note for everybody is there is going to be one more school board meeting before the winter sports season starts. So Heather Lindstedt did indicate that if there were any changes that came in between then and now, she'd let us know of those so that there would still be time for the board to act should, you know, anything change regionally.
Okay, so I need a second.
A second, Lisa?
Thank you, Lisa. Roll call vote. Charlie, what do you say?
Aye.
Thank you. Christine?
Yes.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yes?
Thank you. Patty?
Yes.
Thank you. Alicia?
Yes.
Thank you. John?
Aye.
Thank you. I say aye, and that will be added to the framework. Thank you very much.
You're muted again, Marcia.
Ah, sorry. Oh, you'd think after a year and a half, we'd get this straight. Okay. The policy approval, first reading. Were there any questions or comments for the policy group on this?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Okay, under fees, the paragraph under fees. First off, the part of the last sentence after 6. I didn't understand what that meant.
That's good. That's good.
And then the second one is that the rationale to charge priority 5 users. Okay, a lot of these organizations can't afford $50 per event. So is the intent here to have the school board authorize the waiver of the $50 fee for those organizations? For example, if the scouts use it, you're going to charge them $50 a night to use our facility. And I don't even think they could afford anything like that. So,
Yeah, so the waiver process is still intact, even with the revisions recommended in this policy.
I'm sorry.
There is still an option for organizations to request the board for a waiver.
That's the only questions I have.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so this is a first reading. Next board meeting, we'll see it again. And we're on to board committee updates. So which board, I know that the finance committee has met, so maybe Charlie, you want to start?
Yeah, the finance committee met and we reviewed the budget schedule. So that we're putting in place a schedule for the finance committee to get the budget reviewed by the committee and provide a recommendation prior to the first meeting of the school board concerning the budget. We also looked at ways of funding major initiatives such as the HVAC and restrooms and other things which would cost in the neighborhood of over $3 million. So the committee did review the alternatives for how we could fund that. We haven't decided on anything yet. And we also I've asked that all of the facilities projects be prioritized in terms of what's most important, what's least important, and in terms of what needs to be done immediately and what can be pushed off. And then finally is financial impact. So that if we only have X amount of dollars, where are those dollars best spent?
Thanks, Charlie. I'll say that the, oh, sorry, are there any questions for Charlie?
Yes, I would not ask a question, but also just raise another item. We did talk about possibly doing a session prior to our first budget meeting with the board, where we would try to go through the budget documents for the benefit of people who are not on the finance committee, and give some information on what each of those documents were and how they play into the budget process.
Thanks, John. All right, if there's no other questions or comments for Charlie, I will ask Lisa, you want to talk about goals for a minute?
Do I want to talk about goals for a minute? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, yes. So yes, the goals committee met last week and we started talking about what the district strategic plan looked like and had a nice review of that process and the progress that's been made on it, and discussed where the school board goals fit into that framework and how we want to best move forward supporting that strategic plan.
Are there any questions for Lisa on goals? Okay, John, I think facilities met as well, right?
Yes, we did. Facilities Committee met last Monday. John Leclerc went over a spreadsheet that he has developed based on the sort of the 5-year plan of major tasks. We also talked about preparing for the budget season and what kind of a funding requests we were going to put into the budget. And what we looked at was 2 options. One would be to do a bond item, and the other would be to do a lease item. And in either case, it would be done as the means of a warrant. That was what we decided. That was partly based on our discussions in the Finance Committee as well. But there are several questions. One is, what are the lists of priority items? How much does it amount to, and how much should we ask for? So looking at the priorities and discussing them as a committee, we agreed that there are some basics like the HVAC system and the ADA compliance for the bathrooms, and the replacement of the exterior doors, which are in very bad shape, and that these needed to be priorities. There are some other things, however, that also may need to be priorities. Whether we can afford them in terms of the lease warrant or bond warrant that we're going to put forward will depend on how much it's going to cost and what the budget impact, the tax impact would be to the community. So what we have, there are several things that we decided we would do. One was to come up with several options for carry in terms of bottom lines. For example, the 3 items I just mentioned, the HVAC, the bathrooms, and the doors would amount to just about $6,050,000, at least based on the numbers that John Leclerc has available. Now, John has a very good confidence for some of those numbers. On others, he committed to look at them more closely and make sure that those numbers are reasonably accurate. What we agreed to do as a committee was to give Carrie several options in terms of prices based on those priorities that I've just mentioned, and perhaps including several others in there that, although not as high a priority, still need to get done. So our goal, and actually today is when we said we would do this by, is to give Carrie several different numbers and then to ask her to come up with a first-year cost to the taxpayers, as well as subsequent year costs. And they would be based on either doing the lease or doing the bond. And I'll wrap up by just saying the decision on whether to do a lease or a bond is significant for a number of reasons. One of them is that a 50% positive vote would be enough to pass a warrant item for a lease, whereas for a warrant item for a bond, we would need a 60% vote. And so, there's a little bit less certainty there. Also, there are different options in terms of the length of the bond or the lease. We could be looking at a 10-year bond item, or we could be looking at a 15-year bond item or a 5-year bond item. So part of what Carrie will do, once we give her several numbers to work with, is to price those out at the different timeframes. So I'll stop there.
Are there questions or comments for John? Okay, thank you, John. I will say that I am meeting up with David Dustin to set the education committee kind of agenda and dates. So that's happening this week. And then policy we've already heard from really tonight, unless there's anything else policy wants to add.
Now, we've been doing a lot of review of where we stand with all the policies, and I think this one in particular took quite a long time. The other day, even though it was recently updated in 2019. Part of it was discussion related to changes in terms of cleaning procedures and time it takes for custodians to take care of areas that, you know, when their spaces are used inside. We'll be meeting again soon, right, Alicia? The end of this month,
Well, yeah, barring Thanksgiving, but
probably not Thanksgiving.
yeah, no. We'll have to reschedule that.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, so we're up to the second public comments now.
All right, so just in case somebody was here or wasn't here before, I'll just go through this real quick. On the screen, everybody should see the policy, so make sure you're familiar with that before making a comment. If you could use your first name, last name, and town of residence before making your comment, that would be greatly appreciated. If you are remote, the best way to make a comment would be to use the hand raise feature at the bottom of the screen. That will alert me to say that you would like to make a comment. All right, I'm not seeing any. Oh, I have one. Jennifer? It's saying that you don't have the most up-to-date version of Zoom, Jennifer, which is making it hard to, it's not allowing me to have you have the ability to speak. If you, could you just type in your comment real quick and send it in through the chat, and then I can just read it out loud. And again, just please include first name, last name, town of residence. I guess while we're waiting on that, just to let everybody know, because it has happened a few times in terms of making public comments, things like that, or being able to speak in a through Zoom, you do need to have the most updated version of Zoom. So if you don't have that and you get a message before going into Zoom that you need to update, just do that before the meeting. Because like I said, we have had a couple instances where people have tried to speak or tried to, you know, make their comment, and then we just can't do it just due to incompatibility issue. All right, so Jennifer Clark of Jaffrey, she says, is the matrix going by individual school basis percentage wise, or is it all by all schools combined?
It's per school.
Yeah, it's per school, Jennifer. If you look on the page, it does break down by school. I can just show it to everybody real quick. So if you go to our website, there's a section called COVID-19 resources. you go here, you scroll on down, and it gives you the per school breakdown. And then here's the kind of breakdown of where it falls, and that is a per school level.
Just some information for people out there as to some practices. If we do have, like, for instance, up here where we may have had a couple cases that were, even if they were seemingly not related, but they were maybe on the same sports team or during a period of time, the nurses have sent home a letter that is really constructed from DPHS to let people know. So there wasn't a confirmed cluster or anything like that, but just to let people know that watch for symptoms, watch for things like that, because, you know, they may not have been exposed for a long period of time, but they were next to some people perhaps who were positive. So in the case of like cases where we have maybe one or probably two, like two cases in either a class or in a general area, those letters should be going home to let people know, just alert them. We can't give private information out. 2 is not a cluster. 4 is kind of what they're looking for within the cluster within the school. That's what we had for the bus. Actually, the bus and RMS both were in that between that 5 and 6 range of individuals. So those areas, what we did, well, the buses were already masked. So, you know, there's nothing more you could do there except for put air purification systems inside the buses, but that's not what we don't own those buses. What we did do was once we had a cluster in RMS, we did mask that class. You can see that from the data today that RMS is a school that did not have any in the last 3 to 4 days, any cases whatsoever. There have been other times where we have had an increase in illness. So we've had like 50% out within a class. I think Jaffrey Grade School early on had that. They weren't necessarily COVID related, but we also masked class during that time because it was a different type of illness. So we've done maskings in select areas to mitigate from spread if that was helpful. You know, whether it's helpful or not, you know, you never know 100% certain, but we do that to make sure that that's something that we don't really have within that matrix. We do have in the framework that the principal and the nurse can work in tandem to do that in specific areas.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, that's what we have for public comments. Nobody else.
Did I just see a follow-up question come up?
Yes. The follow-up is one of the rules as far as track teams wearing masks during practices, as well as spectators for winter track. I was told you want me to go.
You can go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so I was talking with Heather Winstad, activities director. She had said that the one sport that we really have on ground is the basketball team, obviously the spirit team again tonight. A lot of other places are off facility. In the event of going to a facility that's not our own, that kind of follows the same visioning team rule, and that we go to ski ice for hockey, if we go to for swimming, whatever rules that facility has in place is what we will follow. We're working on getting that information from all those places so that we have the definitive kind of what needs to be done in each place. Any update from Heather as to what any of those rulings are specifically. So.
But to reiterate, the track athletes as they're running are not going to be wearing masks.
All right, that's all we have.
That's it. Okay, then we're on to board matters. Is there any comments for board matters? All right, and then I see for future items, we're gonna discuss at some point or hear some point about the CTE building project, what's happening.
Yeah, that's just right now, Conval is receiving a presentation. And it has to do with the fact that they have the bulk of the CTE center there. Every so often, there's a cycle of money that is allotted solely for the purpose of supporting CTE centers around the state. And so this region, Conval, Messinic, us, we are coming up to that spot, probably in the 25, 26 year. And so getting some information about whether we want to be doing any renovations to the construction trades, or if there's any sort of desire to even add programming. The state fund, it's a range of what the state funds, but we'll talk a little bit about that. It's usually around that 70 to 75% mark of whatever the costs are for the purpose of CTE, not for other parts of your building, but for that purpose alone. And so, the district would have to raise the rest of it in some way, but that's years down the road, but we wanted to start talking about that right now.
Okay, so next meeting
Yeah.
after next, somewhere.
No,
okay.
next meeting.
Next
Yep.
meeting, great.
Mhm.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. All right, if there's nothing else, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Thank you, Charlie. Anyone want to second that?
I'll second.
Thank you, Alicia. Okay, thanks, everyone. We're adjourned.